Some summer mornings begin so quietly that nothing about them seems important at first. A small town, a family home, a young woman spending the morning alone while her relatives are away. Outside, the streets are calm. It is August in northern Italy, a season when many people have left for holidays, and whole neighborhoods can feel paused, almost suspended in the heat. Inside one house, something happens that no one sees. There is no clear sign of a break-in. No simple explanation. No witness who can say with certainty who entered, who stayed, and who left. By midday, a young man arrives at the house of his girlfriend. He says he has been trying to reach her. He goes inside. And from that moment, a quiet town called Garlasco becomes the center of one of Italy's most debated criminal cases. For years, the public would hear one name again and again: Alberto Stasi. He was Chiara Poggi's boyfriend. He was investigated, acquitted, tried again, and eventually convicted. But this story did not settle easily. There was no confession, no murder weapon clearly identified, no motive that made everyone feel certain. And nearly 2 decades later, old evidence would be examined again. New forensic questions would emerge, and another man, Andrea Sempio, would come under renewed investigation. Sempio denies involvement, and the legal process remains ongoing. Recent reports from Reuters, The Guardian, and ANSA describe the reopened investigation and the new focus on forensic evidence connected to him. Tonight, we move slowly through the Garlasco case, not to sensationalize it, not to rush toward an answer, but to understand how one summer morning became a mystery that Italy has never fully been able to put to rest. Welcome back. This is a calm, true crime story for sleep, told with care, patience, and respect for the real people at the center of it. Tonight's episode is about the death of Chiara Poggi in Garlasco, Italy, and the long, complicated legal story that followed. The details will be kept calm and non-graphic. The focus is on the timeline, the investigation, the court process, and the unanswered questions that still surround the case. You can listen with the lights low, the screen off, or while resting at the end of the day. Now, let's go back to northern Italy, in the summer of 2007. Garlasco is a small town in the province of Pavia in Lombardy, northern Italy. It is not the kind of place most people outside Italy would have known before 2007. It was a quiet community, with ordinary streets, family homes, local routines, and the familiar rhythm of a town where many lives overlap in small ways. In August, much of Italy slows down. Families travel, shops close, streets become quieter. Ordinary neighborhoods can feel almost empty. That was the setting in which Chiara Poggi was living her life. Chiara was 26 years old. She lived with her family in Garlasco and was described publicly as a young woman close to her parents and brother, someone with a normal, private life before her name became known across the country. Her boyfriend was Alberto Stasi. Alberto was a university student at the time. He studied economics and had no criminal record. To the outside world, he did not look like a person at the edge of a violent crime. And that is part of what made the case so difficult for many people to understand. There was no obvious storm before it. No public history of violence between Chiara and Alberto. No simple, visible reason why an ordinary summer morning would end in tragedy. On August 13th, 2007, Chiara was at home, alone. Her parents and brother were away on holiday. The house was quiet. And somewhere within that morning, someone entered. On Monday, August 13th, 2007, Chiara Poggi was killed inside her family home in Garlasco. The house reportedly showed no clear signs of forced entry. This would become one of the major questions in the case. If the door had not been forced open, then did Chiara let someone in? Did she know the person? Was the visitor familiar enough that she felt no immediate fear? In criminal investigations, doors can matter. A locked door, an open door, a door without damage. Each one can change the shape of a theory. Later that day, Alberto Stasi arrived at the Poggi home. He said he had been trying to contact Chiara and had received no answer. When he entered the house, he found her and contacted authorities. The scene was serious and disturbing, but for this telling, we do not need to linger on graphic detail. What matters is that Chiara had been attacked in her own home. And almost immediately, the case became intensely personal. The person who reported finding her was also her boyfriend. That did not make him guilty, but it did mean investigators had to look closely at him. They examined his movements, his communications, his clothing, his shoes, and his account of what he had done after entering the house. One point of debate involved the condition of Alberto's shoes and clothing. Investigators questioned whether someone could have moved through parts of the home as he described without showing the traces they expected. Small things began to matter. A pair of shoes, a timeline, a phone call, a possible trace of biological material, a few minutes that could be interpreted in different ways. The Garlasco case would become a case built not around one simple, unmistakable piece of evidence, but around interpretation. And interpretation can be fragile. After Chiara's death, investigators focused heavily on Alberto Stasi. He denied involvement. Over the years, the case moved through a complicated legal path. Alberto was initially acquitted, including in appeal proceedings. But the case continued through the Italian court system, and in 2015, Italy's Court of Cassation confirmed his conviction. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Reuters and The Guardian both summarized that Stasi was convicted in 2015 after earlier acquittals, while continuing to maintain his innocence. For many people, that should have been the end. A final judgment. A prison sentence. A closed file. But the Garlasco case never truly became quiet. There were too many lingering uncertainties. No confession. No murder weapon. No universally accepted motive. And forensic evidence that continued to be debated. This is one reason the case became so widely discussed in Italy. It was not only a question of whether Alberto Stasi had been convicted, it was a question of whether the conviction made people feel certain. In court, certainty has a legal standard. In public life, certainty is emotional. And those two forms of certainty do not always match. Some believed the courts had reached the right conclusion. Others believed Alberto had been wrongly convicted. Meanwhile, Chiara's family had to live through the original loss, the public attention, the trials, the appeals, and then, years later, the reopening of painful questions. That is one of the quiet tragedies of a case like this. Every legal development may be necessary. Every new test may matter. But for a family, each one can reopen the same wound. In 2025, the Garlasco case was reopened. The renewed attention centered on forensic evidence, including DNA reportedly found under Chiara's fingernails. According to recent reports, this new analysis pointed investigators toward Andrea Sempio, a friend of Chiara's brother. Sempio had been considered in the past, but was not prosecuted at that time. In the renewed investigation, prosecutors began focusing on him again. Reuters reported in May 2026 that fresh forensic leads had revived doubts in the case, and that Sempio denied involvement. The Guardian also reported that Sempio had chosen to remain silent when questioned, while denying the accusations against him. This development changed the public conversation. The question was no longer only, did Alberto Stasi kill Chiara Poggi? Now there was another question. Was Italy looking at one of its most serious possible miscarriages of justice? That phrase is heavy. It should not be used lightly. But when a person has been convicted and imprisoned, and investigators later begin pursuing another suspect, the justice system has to look back at itself, not just at the evidence, but at the path it took. What was tested? What was missed? What was interpreted too strongly? What was ignored too quickly? In May 2026, ANSA reported that prosecutors had closed the new Garlasco investigation and were pursuing the theory that Andrea Sempio killed Chiara. ANSA also noted that Stasi had twice been acquitted before being convicted, and that he had been granted semi-liberty after the probe into Sempio was open. Still, it is important to be careful. An investigation is not the same as a final conviction. Andrea Sempio denies involvement. The legal process must continue before any final conclusion can be stated as fact. And Alberto Stasi's conviction, though now under renewed scrutiny, remains part of the legal history of the case. So the Garlasco case stands in a difficult place. It has an old judgment, a new suspect, a grieving family, and a public still asking what really happened inside that house on August 13, 2007. The Garlasco case is not simply an unsolved mystery. It is more complicated than that. It is a case that was legally resolved and then unsettled again. That makes it especially difficult to talk about. There are several reasons why the case has continued to trouble people. The first is the absence of a clear motive. A motive is not always legally required for a conviction. Courts can convict based on evidence even when the emotional reason behind a crime remains unclear. But people naturally look for motive. They want the story to make sense. They want to know why. When no clear motive appears, the mind keeps circling the same empty space. The second reason is the lack of a confirmed murder weapon. Without a weapon, investigators and courts must rely more heavily on reconstruction, forensic interpretation, timelines, and indirect evidence. That can still be enough in some cases, but it can also leave room for doubt. The third reason is the forensic debate. DNA can seem powerful. In some cases, it is. But DNA is not magic. It has to be collected properly, preserved properly, tested carefully, and interpreted in context. A trace can suggest contact. It can suggest presence, but it does not always explain how, when, or why that trace got there. In the Garlasco case, the renewed focus on DNA under Chiara's fingernails is one reason the case returned to public attention years after Alberto Stasi's conviction. The fourth reason is the unusual legal journey. Alberto Stasi was acquitted before he was ultimately convicted. For the legal system, that may reflect the normal process of appeals and review. For the public, it creates uncertainty. People ask how one court could see reasonable doubt while another court later saw guilt. That does not automatically mean the final judgment was wrong. But it does explain why the case never fully settled in the public mind. And finally, the case remains unsettled because it touches two deep fears at once. The fear that a guilty person might escape justice, and the fear that an innocent person might be punished for something he did not do. Both fears are serious. Both matter. And in the middle of them is Chiara Poggi, a young woman who lost her life in the quiet of her own home. Some cases end with certainty, a confession, a clear motive, a weapon, a complete timeline. The Garlasco case has never felt that simple. It is the story of a small town in summer, a young woman alone at home, a boyfriend who found her, a trial process that moved back and forth, and evidence that continued to raise questions long after a sentence was handed down. For years, Alberto Stasi's conviction stood as the legal answer. Then, the case reopened. Andrea Sempio became the focus of renewed investigation, while denying involvement. And Italy was left with a troubling possibility that one of its most famous murder cases may not have been understood correctly the first time. As of May 2026, the story is still legally sensitive and developing. Reports say prosecutors have pursued a new theory focused on Sempio, while questions remain about what this could mean for Stasi's conviction and for the broader history of the case. But beyond the legal arguments, beyond the headlines, and beyond the television debates, there is one person who should remain at the center: Chiara Poggi. Before she was a case name, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman with a private life that should never have become a national mystery. The quiet weight of the Garlasco case is not only that a crime happened, it is that certainty has been so hard to reach. And when certainty does not come, the past does not stay still. It returns. In old files, in new tests, in courtrooms, in family memory, and in the questions that remain after the night has gone quiet. Tonight, we leave the story there, not with a final answer, but with care, with patience, and with respect for the truth, wherever it may eventually lead. Thank you for listening. If you are resting now, you do not need to hold on to every detail. Let the story settle gently, and let the night become quiet again. Behind every true crime case is a real person, a real family, and a truth that deserves to be handled carefully. Sleep well and take care.